You're listening to the Chopped Podcast, episode number 15. Oh, snap! Hey everyone, I'm Marley of the blog Namely Marley. Thanks for joining me today for the 15th episode of the Chopped Podcast. This is the podcast designed for people just like you, bloggers who love food. Each week I'm sharing interviews, thoughts, and stories, everything related to food blogging, so we can all learn together about what works with food blogging and a little bit about what doesn't. Today's guest is Jeff Sanders of the site jeffsanders.com and the podcast, The 5 a.m. Miracle. We're talking about productivity. It's such an important topic for food bloggers because we have so many things going on each and every day. I like to call it the grocery store syndrome. Bear with me for a moment. Because if you're like me, you go to the grocery store with one thing in mind, and maybe it's bananas, let's say. And then you get to the grocery store and you realize you're out of cereal. So you go to the cereal aisle and you grab your cereal, and then you realize, oh, there's some granola bars. You could use some more of those. And then you realize they've got Oreos on sale in aisle 3. So you head over to aisle 3 and you get those Oreos, and then you forget that you're out of sriracha. So you head over to that aisle and get some, because we can't run out of sriracha. And then you're finally on your way home and you realize that you didn't even get the stupid bananas. So that's what I think of when I think of blogging sometimes, because it seems like we have so many things that we have to do that sometimes it's hard to get the one thing done that you really needed to get done. I actually confirmed this a little bit with the ChoppedCon Facebook community too, because I asked the question, what are the things that are most pressing to people? And so it made me feel good, I guess, to know that I'm not the only one that has to deal with this issue of productivity and time management. It's a really important thing for us to be focusing on. So that's why I reached out to Jeff Sanders, because he's one of my favorite productivity podcasters. He has so many great tips to share, from things like his favorite productivity apps to processes that he uses, how he stays motivated, and even exercise. Believe it or not, exercise has a big impact on productivity. But before I move on to that interview with Jeff, don't forget to mark your calendars for October 15th to the 16th. That's when we're going to be having the Chopped Conference, and I would love to meet you there. So we have a lot of great information coming soon, so stay tuned for more information. Now, let's get straight to that interview with Jeff. Today's intro shout out is to Liren Baker of the blog Kitchen Confidant, who recently confessed to listening to the Chopped Podcast while packing lunches. Yay for brown bagging it. Thanks for the shout out, Liren. So what are you doing while listening to the Chopped Podcast? Send me a shout out on Twitter or Instagram using hashtag ChoppedCon, and maybe I'll feature you and your site in an upcoming episode. But for today, in honor of Liren, everybody get out your favorite lunch boxes, line up the baggies and storage containers, chop up some carrot sticks, put on those earbuds, and let's talk about all things food blogging and so much more. Hey everyone, I'm really excited to have Jeff Sanders of the podcast 5 a.m. Miracle on the show today. Jeff, welcome to the Chopped Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Marla. It's awesome to be here today.
Great to have you. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today because you have some of the best productivity and motivation tips that I've heard, and I'm really excited to share these with the Chopped listeners today. And you talk a lot about motivation and productivity, and I'm really looking forward to talking all that. But first, let's go back a little bit in time, and I just want to ask you how you got your start with all of this. What caused you to raise your shingle on the internet?
It really started for me back when I got engaged, actually. This is probably about 7 years ago now. This is the day after I got engaged. My wife said that she wanted to have a wedding website. And at the time, I was like, well, I had nothing online, no experience doing anything with that. But I was like, I'll just give that a shot and put one up. And in the process of doing that, of building a website just for our wedding, a simple little personal site, I really fell in love with the process of creativity and wanting to share my thoughts and advice, and just started I made a tiny little podcast for that little website. Had some blog posts and some pictures, and I got really excited about online content creation. And so then there's about probably a year and a half later, I started my first, so I call it my professional blog, that was called Graduated and Clueless, because that was my life at the time. And then that kind of morphed into a self-published book that I put together, and then about probably 2 years after that is when I began the website where I'm currently at jeffsanders.com. And that's what I now kind of have that whole history of creating content, but in the very beginning, it was really just a desire to build a website for my wife, and that was it.
Wow, that's really cool. You know, I think sometimes it's easy to hear somebody tell their story like that, and it just sounds so neat and precise. But from what I've heard from your interviews, there was a little bit more, jagged edges along the way. Like you were in a job that you didn't really like very much, and that's what caused you to kind of feel motivated to try something different.
Yeah, I mean, the desire to kind of take that stuff and make it my full-time career it really came out after the college experience of realizing, well, now I need to find a job. But I find a job, and I'm like, well, I don't like this job. So I changed jobs. And, well, this job sucks too. And then I realized, like, I don't want to work for other people. I don't want to be an employee. That was never my intention. But I didn't know that until I experienced enough of those jobs to realize that was really, like, I didn't belong there.
Right.
And it was doing this, the blog and the podcast on the side and realizing this is what I enjoy doing. This is what I spend hours a day doing in my free time whenever I have it. And so that's what I should do full time because that's what I love. It took, multiple years to develop that. But yeah, there was a lot of kind of like experiences that weren't positive because my jobs weren't the best. But that was motivation to work harder to build the business. And so that's where that led from, was just this real desire to work for myself and to have a creative outlet. And I found all of that really with online business.
Oh, that's great. So the primary audience of the Chop podcast is food bloggers, and I like to look at food bloggers as kind of like small businesses, and I feel like they face some of the same issues as small businesses, or at least like an online entrepreneur. So I'm curious, what are your favorite tips for productivity for people like that?
If you're going to start your own food blog, your own online business, I think being productive is really about knowing what it matters most to your business or your online space. I think for me, I spent so many hours just for years, like so much time was invested in doing things that just didn't really matter. Like I would tweak the CSS code and the design of the site, and I would mess around with all these different little features. And like I spent so much time doing things that like I thought were important because serious bloggers had this like really fancy site. But the reality is, your readers don't actually care that much.
Right.
Like they come back for the content. They come back for great information that you provide to them. And so if you're helpful, they'll overlook the fact that your site's not beautiful. And that it still is a problem today. Like I still spend so many hours tweaking things that don't actually matter. So in terms of being productive, I think that the very first thing you have to identify, this is any big project, but especially with online stuff, because it's so overwhelming at times, you have to know what matters, identify that up front, and then decide how you're going to make time for those specific things. And then if you have free time and you want to mess around with something else that's fun, that's fine, but it's only after you've done the things that matter most. And that's identifying, whether it's the content creation you're going to be doing or some new big project you want to release to your audience, whatever the thing is you want to do, making sure those things are your priority. And when you can focus on that, then you get the results you really want.
I think that's interesting, Jeff, because that kind of sounds to me like the difference between feeling productive and actually being productive. So like I can have all these piddly little things that I'm doing, or as a food blogger, like we may be so heavily engaged in social media and spending our waking minutes, on our phones sharing things and or just things behind, like you say, behind the scenes, working on the site, SEO, all these things, and it makes me feel productive. I'm crossing a lot of things off my list, but am I actually being productive?
Yeah, I think for me, I define that in the way that Stephen Covey does, which is being productive versus being effective. And when you're productive, you're basically just busy. You're doing a lot of stuff, but does any of it actually matter? And that's the question you have to ask for yourself. And then when you're being effective, that's when you're doing things that you've already pre-identified as this is important, this matters, and when I do this, whether I feel good about it or not doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the things that needed to get done got done.
Honestly, I'm actually rereading that. Is that 7 Habits?
Yes.
I'm rereading that book, but I haven't got to that section yet. Does he define how you can tell what effective is?
Well, I mean, the basic answer is it's subjective. Like you have to decide for yourself what that means because everyone's business is different. There's different goals in mind, and really being effective is all about asking yourself where are you going and how are you going to get directly to that goal. And if you're making steps right towards your goal, then that's very effective. But if you're just randomly doing things because you can do things, it's an endless trap. There's always so much you could be doing that you can't let that run your day because you'll literally work nonstop forever and never really get the success and the goals you wanted accomplished.
Yeah, that's a good point, is to make sure you're being targeted on what you're doing. That's great. On your podcast, The 5 a.m. Miracle, you talk about some of your favorite productivity tools, and I was wondering if you could share a few of those with us right now.
Sure. For me, productivity really comes down to a few key tools that I use every single day that dictate, my most important priorities. My most important tool is a task management system called Nozbe. It's a Polish word. It's Nozbe. And it's based on David Allen's Getting Things Done system. And so what that does is it allows you to create basically a lot of lists, a lot of projects, and you're able to manage everything in the list format. And you can prioritize things, and you can assign dates on a calendar for the tasks that you have. But really, for me, it's my personal calendar, it's my personal task manager. Everything that I do runs in and out of that system. So every day, this interview today that we're doing was on my Noseby task list as a thing to do next. And I had that, prioritized in order. So every day I'm using that and looking off of it to figure out what actually matters today, when am I going to do it. And so that's my life. Noseby really is where I live and breathe out of my to-do list. But then outside of that, I have Evernote, which is pretty popular with most people now. And basically, it's an online note-taking tool. And so I use that for research. I use that to keep ideas. I'm working on a book right now, so I've got lots of book ideas in Evernote and lots of different projects that are in there. So that becomes kind of the go-to place just to dump ideas. And then my third piece of this puzzle is Google Drive, which you can use any number of cloud services if you want to. But I use Google Drive as my place to store files, PDF documents, lots of different show notes of the podcast, whatever else that I'm doing, files basically go there. So between those three tools, my whole life can really be found right there. And there's three different reasons to use them, but they all have their own purpose. And if you can keep all of them in the cloud and access those wherever you want, and you can keep everything very simplified and very organized and consolidated to those systems, I have found that everything I need to access and need to get a hold of is there, and I've got it organized in a very simplistic manner. So if I need to find it, I've got it. And that makes my life really hum every day the way that I want it to. So that's what I use, and it works pretty well.
And I guess that one of the beautiful things about that is that you can access from your office. You can also access that if you're at a coffee shop because it's on the cloud, right? So
yeah, everything I do is on the cloud, and that was the switch I made about 3 years ago, and that has been revolutionary in the way that I work, because now I can go work wherever I want, and it really has changed the way that I operate.
That's great. Excellent. So can you give us a behind-the-scenes look at the day in the life of blogger, podcaster Jeff Sanders?
Sure. This is always a great question because I am the 5 a.m. guy. So essentially for me, my life, it does begin at 5 a.m., but more importantly than that, my day begins the night before. So that's when I plan my next day. That's when I have a very specific, I sit down and I say, what am I going to do tomorrow and in what order and at what times? And once I define that, then I can go to bed knowing my next day is planned. Mm-hmm. And the average day for me does begin at 5 a.m., sometimes 6 a.m., but usually as early as I can get up. I like to get up whenever that time is, because my wife gets out of bed at 7. So if I have a little bit of time before she's awake, it's really helpful for me to go through my morning routine, which for me involves drinking a liter of water, having a double espresso, making a Vitamix blender full of smoothies. I usually exercise in the morning as well. And then after that process, it flows into my work day where I go into my most important task. Usually I go to a library to do that, actually. I have a home office, but I prefer to go somewhere else to work most of the time because I'm more focused there. So I'll go to a library or coffee shop or something. And then I work for as many hours as I possibly can stand it. And before I come home and have my evening routine as well, it's built in with the idea of having a boundary at the end of the day. So I have an 8 p.m. boundary, which says that by 8 p.m., I have to stop all work. Turn the computer off, turn the phone off, I'm done. Because if I don't have that boundary, then I will just keep working and I'll never go to bed. Yeah. And so I have to stop myself. And that keeps my day more structured. Having those boundaries is really helpful. Whether it's the morning boundary to wake up or the evening to stop work, I like to have as much of that as I possibly can to keep the day structured and more effective.
And that helps you have more balance in your life too, right? I mean, you've got to spend relationship time and you've got to do some things that you enjoy doing too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of those where my wife works a lot as well, so it's not as important at this point. But we are planning to have our first child sometime soon, so I'd like to have. Well, not yet, not officially yet, but that's in the works the next couple of years. So because of that, I know my life, the way it works today is not the way it's going to work forever. So I like to structure it in the way it says how can I get the most out of my day based on the way my life is currently set up. And so even though I know that things might change, we're going to move soon, we're going to maybe have a baby in a few years, things are going to be happening. Yeah. So how can I get the very most out of my day? And so right now I'm kind of lucky because I have a little more time to myself, but it's not going to last forever. So I still have to ask myself, what matters today? How can I get the most out of today? And then when things change, they'll change. But as long as I know what matters, I can structure my day around that. Things are much more effective.
That's great. You said something kind of interesting to me because I feel the same way that I have a home office and I do work here a lot. I've got a standing desk. I do all these things. But I find that for some reason, if I go to a coffee shop or the library, I am so much more productive. And I'm curious, it seems like there's a lot more distractions there. Why would that be?
it's tough for me because I know that a coffee shop, technically speaking, has more going on than my home office. Like where I am right now, there's nothing happening here besides me talking to you on the microphone. But at a coffee shop, there's more things happening. But somehow when I go there, or even to a library, when there's people talking around me or something, I just put on my headphones and I get on the computer and I just go. And I find that I can block that environment better. And I know that I'm not going to be distracted by a television. I'm not going to waste time doing, household chores or walking my dog or whatever it is I might do if I'm at home. So if I can find an environment that works for me, I want to find that and stick with it. So right now, the library and Starbucks tend to be my best go-to locations, and it works. And for whatever reason, like I'm able to really get a lot done there. So I make it my best effort to get there as often as I can because I know that once I'm there, I'm going to get to work and get a lot done.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I'm glad to, I think you make a good point about it, and that helps explain it a little bit. Maybe everybody should, if it works for you. I think actually it's really about experimentation. If you work better in your home office, great. But if you go out and try a different location and see if that helps you be more productive.
Yeah, I think it's really great to experiment with a lot of different locations because I didn't even know that Starbucks would be a good choice for me until a few years ago. And once I started doing that, I was like, wait a minute, this is amazing. Like, how did I miss this? Like, it's been here the whole time, and yet I just never utilized it. So, yeah, it's great to have that opportunity. That's
great. This question is going to sound similar to the one we just had a couple of questions ago, but it's really different. And so being busy, I'm thinking about food bloggers or online entrepreneurs in general, it can be being busy can be very seductive. It can make you feel like you're getting all these things done. We're on our phones, we're in these private Facebook groups, we're constantly learning, constantly talking. But I know that I've listened to you on your podcast, and I know that you've taken these kind of regular sabbaticals where my impression of it based on what I've read from you is that you're unplugging, you're taking even like a month off where you're not blogging, you're not doing anything, creating content, any of that. I'm curious how being unplugged is a way that makes you more productive.
This is a great question because I did this for the first time last August, so it was about 7 months ago, and I decided this, it was back the month before in July, I said to myself, like, I need a break from this. Like, I know I love to create content, I love to blog, I love to podcast, I love what I do, but if I don't get a break, like some mental space, I don't think I'm going to be able to continue this same pace that I'm going. And so I made the choice to create basically some basic little easy blog posts, some videos that I shared. I put together some interviews that I had done to put on the podcast. So there's still content being created, but it was not the same kind of content that I usually would spend a lot of time developing. And so once I had those things in place in July, then when August 1st showed up, I had a whole month where I was not blogging, I was not podcasting, I wasn't really on social media, I wasn't really replying to emails as often. I was doing the very best I could to unplug and be detached from my normal daily routine. And back in August when this happened, I had a vacation planned for the first week, and so I was out in New Orleans having fun with my friends, and I came back from this trip, and I had probably 3 or 4 days where I really just didn't do very much at all. And it was the most kind of relaxing few days I'd had in a long, long time. And then at the end of like probably 3 or 4 days after that, the ideas started to flood in. And I got one after another after another. And for the next like 2 weeks of that sabbatical, I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life because I had so many amazing ideas that probably never would have shown up had I not had that break. Like I desperately needed time to walk away to get those ideas to come. And then, ironically, I did the same thing again in February, and it worked exactly the same way. I got so many new ideas, and I realized like taking a break from the usual craziness is the only way to get the better ideas and the big growth and the massive change that is going to be needed to grow, for the future. I need that time away from the work to be able to create better work. And so, to me, it's an invaluable thing to be able to have to do because it's just so helpful.
And so, there's this big fear like, oh, if I'm not creating the same kind of content on my blog, things are just going to, explode or fall apart. But everything was fine.
I mean, in terms of number of podcast downloads and website visitors, nothing changed at all. Like That's it was great. Exactly the same as it was when I left. And so, yeah, that I had a big fear that my podcast downloads would disappear, my audience would just leave me, and the whole thing would be, back from scratch. But what happened is people stuck around and they were curious to see what happened. Especially, I discuss productivity all the time, and so people wanted to know, was I more productive because I had a month off? Like that was kind of a question they had. And it turns out that, yeah, taking breaks is one of the best things you can do to actually get more done, which is ironic, but very true.
I think that's probably even particularly important to people who are creatives, like content creators. It's a lot of work, and you're constantly dipping from the well, and every now and then you got to fill the well back up.
Yeah, and this is Todd Henry, who's a author of the book Die Empty, and he talks a lot about that same concept of just how he spends so much time consuming other people's content, whether it's books that he's reading, podcasts listening to, conferences he goes to. Yeah. There's lots and lots and lots of consumption because it's the only way that he can fuel his fire to create better work for his audience. And I think it's very true. And the more that you're learning, the more that you're consuming, the more you have to then share with other people as well.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, you talk about exercise on your podcast, and I know that you're a runner, and you've talked about other exercise that you've done as well. And I think recently you mentioned that you've exercised actually more than, like 40 days in a row. That's impressive. For a busy entrepreneur, I think, our to-do list is so long, and it's easy for us to feel like exercise is really just a luxury, like I'll do it when I have time or that kind of thing. But I think you're saying exercise can actually help you be more productive. Is that right?
Exercise is one of the most amazing things in the world because it gives you the opposite of what you think it's going to give you. Like, it gives you more energy. It gives you the ability to be more productive because it transforms the way your brain operates. It transforms your body. Mm-hmm. Like, there's no doubt that days that I get up and work out are better days for me in terms of my work. I usually not only get more done, but I have higher quality work as well. Because it literally, like, I read a book about this. What was it called? Spark. It's a book all about how exercise helps develop neurons in your brain. And then you actually make more connections and you are a smarter human being if you exercise consistently. Especially with cardiovascular exercise, where running or swimming or cycling, things like that really help develop your brain. And that's why you should work out, more so than the physical, like muscle growth or endurance. It's really about making your brain smarter.
Or calories burned.
Or calories burned, yeah, weight loss if that's your goal. Like, whatever the case is, what you're trying to go for is actually your brain is what gets the greatest benefit. And so if you are a creative person and you're trying to produce better work and you're trying to get more done, exercise can be one of your greatest assets to doing that, even though it seems like it takes time away from the work. As a sustainable lifestyle, exercise is going to, and it really has to be a part of your routine for the long term, because if you ignore it, you're never going to get those benefits, and you'll sacrifice your health to grow the business, but then you end up with one of those people who's got $1 million but dying of a heart attack, and it doesn't work in the long run. And so you want to be able to have some sort of a balance. And you have to work out every single day. You could do it, twice a week. You just find time twice a week to work out. That's going to be more than nothing, and that's going to give you benefits you would otherwise not ever have.
Yeah, I like to say that in order to have energy, you have to spend energy, which is kind of unique.
Totally. It's an amazing thing, but it totally works.
Yeah, and it, even just because you're busy doesn't mean that you can't squeeze in some time to, and honestly, I find if I do it first in the morning, that helps me because it's done for the day.
Yeah, I think working out in the morning is probably the only time that I will ever actually do it. If I wait until, past, let's say, like 10 a.m., it just doesn't happen. There's too many things to go on. There's too many emails, too many ideas, too many projects. And so, yeah, it's not done by 10 a.m. In my life, it never happens. And so I really have to put that as a boundary to say, make sure I get the workout in. And for me, you mentioned the idea of a shorter workout or make the time for it. Burst training for me has become one of the greatest things for me in terms of making time for exercise. And burst training is simply doing a really intense, high-intensity interval exercise for like 15 to 20 minutes. And you work out really hard, and then you're done. And that has been found to have greater results than doing a 45-minute, slow run. And so if you don't have a lot of time, doing just really intense workouts for short time periods and then call it quits, that works really well.
So that's a great tip for people. So, if you think you don't have time, if you can find 15, even, 20 minutes, get up, do a high intensity, I don't know, jumping jacks or whatever you can to like running in place, or what constitutes that high intensity for you?
There's a really specific way to do this if you want to follow what's called the HIIT, or High Intensity Interval Training System. But really what it's all about is just getting your heart rate up at a very high level.
Yeah.
And usually the case, I think most people do it where you'll do like a full minute of real intense workout, and then you have 20 seconds where you take a break. And then you go back to another full minute on, and then a short break. And you do that, you just kind of cycle through back and forth of real intense and then a break for about 15 to 20 minutes. And that's all it takes. And if you do that, probably 3 times a week, maybe.
Yeah.
That's really all it takes to get weight loss or massive energy boosts or whatever you're going for. Most of the time, you can get really great results with a very short workout.
Oh, that's great. I mean, another favorite tip of mine is I have an elliptical machine downstairs, and so I have usually some training video that I like to watch every day. Some series of trainings. I don't know whether it's how to use Facebook or, we all have things that we're all working on, how to do a better email campaign or those kinds of things. And so I make sure I'm on my elliptical, and I don't have to go fast, but at least it's getting some exercise.
Yeah, I mean, every little bit helps. So if you can move your body, it definitely is a good thing.
That's right. And lately you've been talking about meditation, and it's something I've taken on in my life. And I remember when I first heard about it, I thought that is the strangest thing in the world, that for me to be more productive, I have to think about nothing. But I have found meditation to be really helpful. And it sounds like that's something that you're promoting as well.
Yeah, that was something I avoided for a long time because I had the same thought. I was like, I'm not just going to sit still and stare at the wall or close my eyes, for 20 minutes. Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
And then so I decided, January 1st, I was like, fine, it's a new year. If I'm ever going to try this, let's just do it now and see how it works. And I started with doing just 1 minute a day, and then it was 2 minutes, and then 5, and then 10, and now I'm up to about 15 minutes a day. And it is really powerful. And I did not see that coming. It was one of those just really amazing things where you're able to train your brain to focus. It's not that you think about nothing. It's that you think about very few things. So one or two things, whether it's breathing or you're thinking about a certain concept that you're really moved by. You focus your thoughts on one thing. And then with that, you're able to, over time, clear your mind, train your brain to focus, and it really brings you more stress relief. You feel more calm. It's really great in the middle of the day if you're really stressed out and busy to have that little break, because when you come back to work, you really do think better. Like, I have found that I'm more productive after that 10-minute break because I allowed my brain the time to get the rest that it needed.
That'd be a great after lunch kind of thing to do then.
Oh, definitely. I find that either in the morning or early afternoon has been the best time for me to do this. If I do it late at night, I just tend to fall asleep or feel like I want to fall asleep. So I like to do that, either part of the morning routine or, like you said, after lunch or early afternoon is good.
Well, I have been using it as a way of helping me fall asleep when I had too many things going on during the day and my mind's just running and I can't, I need to shut it down. Oftentimes I can just do a really quick meditation and I'm relaxed and ready to go to sleep.
Yeah, that's true. And there's an app that I have called Buddhify, which has a ton of different meditations that are all guided. There's probably there's probably 60 in there or something. There's a ton of them. And they have different themes. So one is I feel angry today, so I'll meditate on, try to get rid of my anger, or I'm stressed out today, or I'm tired today, or whatever the case is. And so I know one of them has to do with falling asleep and having to relax in the evening. And that's a cool app. I also use Calm is another one, and Headspace. Those are the three that I've tried, and they're all really good.
Headspace is my favorite, but I haven't tried Buddhify or Calm, so I'm going to put that on the show notes page for everybody. So you've talked about this concept of the 12-year week. No, I said that the wrong way. The 12-week year.
Yes. Yes. It's a very long week. 12-year week.
Very long week. The 12-week year. And I like the concept of that. And you've mentioned it as something that's really helped you become more productive. And I'm curious if you can explain that for everybody.
Yeah, this is a concept that I had heard about, because there is a book about that called The 12-Week Year, and I hadn't read that book. Someone had recommended that I'd have a shorter year, and so I said, okay, well, I'll give that a shot. And so when January 1st rolled around this year, I created a whole new goal system for myself and said, well, I'm just going to limit my goals this year to just a 3-month or 12-week time span, and I'm not going to plan any goals after those 90 days. So 12 weeks is all I've got. That's it. After that, I'll get to it in the next quarter. And so with that system, I started to develop, a very simplistic goal system, because in 90 days, you really can only do a couple of things really well. And so I chose my 2 or 3 goals, and I just started working on those. And that's where that whole, I worked out every day for 48 days in a row. That was born out of this 12-week year, because I had the goal of doing an ultra marathon by the end of 2015. And so I broke that down and said, well, at the end of the first quarter, I want to do a 17-mile trail run. So to get there, I should work out every day, and I made this whole plan. And I found myself being able to focus so much more on the few goals that mattered, because I knew my year technically was a little bit shorter, 4 times shorter actually. So because of that, I could focus on what really mattered, and the rest of the goals were put on another list for later. Like, I'll get to it next quarter or later on in the year, but I'm not going to focus on it now. And with that kind of clarity, I made so much more progress in the few goals that I had. For me, like in my first quarter this year, it's been, training for the ultra marathon. It was looking for a house. And then randomly I got a book contract also, so that became my number one most important goal. And so I had these very few things that mattered, but I had the time and the focus to get the progress on those, and that to me made a phenomenal difference.
Could you see a blogger using something like that as a way of helping them? Like, let's say they have a goal of wanting to publish 3 times a week, and they say, okay, just for this 9-month, or I obviously can't get this right, this 12-week period, I'm gonna get this. I'm gonna do 3 posts a week during this period and see how it works.
Yeah, I think for a trial run, I usually recommend 30-day trials, but if you want to do the 12-week trial, that would actually be very effective as well, especially let's say you have the goal of blogging 3 times a week. You could say, well, that would be 12 posts a month over the course of a quarter, so 36 posts. So you could say, well, if I need to write that number of posts by the end of the quarter, I could try to batch those together and write a whole lot in the first month and then a whole lot in the second month and have those things scheduled to be released later on in the month and get more clarity and more focus around your content creation schedule. So if you have that kind of more niche down focus on that, yeah, I think you could definitely, especially in terms of blogging and creating content, be able to schedule when you're going to produce, what you're going to produce, and have that really laid out ahead of time, so it's not going to be a surprise every week or every day you show up and you're like, what should today's blog post be about? Like, you should never have that question. It should already be decided ahead of time, and you can even tell your audience, what to expect in the next blog post. So it holds you accountable. If you've already announced it, now you have to go through and do it, which is very effective as well.
Yes, that's a great idea. And I guess another idea would be if you've always wanted to do an ebook as part of your blog, giving yourself this shortened year can help you get that accomplished.
Yeah, definitely. I think that ebooks are a great extension of a blog, and so if you're able to schedule that into your same 12-week year, that would be very good as well. Definitely.
So you said something in one of your podcast episodes that really had a big impact on me, and it was on the concept of being too comfortable. And it dawned on me after you said that, I kind of spent some time thinking about it. Like, comfort is a little bit like gravity. We're drawn to it for some reason. Like, it's easy just to lounge around. Like, I can work all day in my flannel PJs, or I can, sit downstairs on the couch and work. That's really comfortable for me, instead of, I've got this standing desk, and I feel like I'm more productive when I do that, or if I'm paying attention to those kinds of things. And I was just curious if you remember that podcast episode too, and if so, like, what are the ways that you think people can best, kind of avoid the trap of being comfortable, but not obviously becoming a masochist either, but, finding ways to discipline yourself, I guess.
Yeah, I called that episode the enemy of greatness, because that's exactly what comfort is. It's the opposite of what's going to make you the person you want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think it's kind of a harsh statement to say that. It sounds so intense, but it's totally true, because the things that are going to make us, the great people we want to be are usually hard things. They're difficult. Not that you have to be a masochist in order to achieve them, but it certainly helps if you're able to embrace the challenge and look forward to it and lean that direction, as opposed to leaning towards being comfortable or laying on the couch or whatever else you would do to seek comfort. And I heard this concept from Dean Karnazes, who is a very famous ultra-marathon runner, and he has many ridiculous adventures of him running hundreds of miles at a time all over the world, and he's just the most intense runner you could possibly imagine. And he is so driven by this idea of escaping comfort and seeking out challenge and trying to find the things that are hardest, because he knows that's where the growth is, that's where the learning curve is, and that's where his greatness is going to be sharpened. He's going to be better for it. And you have to really kind of put yourself in that position to say, I'm going to go after the things that are hard. And then when you do that, recognize how you feel afterwards, because most of the time that's when you feel most accomplished and you feel the best about yourself. Whereas when you are really comfortable and you're like, binge watching, House of Cards on Netflix for 12 hours in a row, like, you might think you love it, but the reality is at the end of the day, I feel just kind of like worthless. Like, I feel like, I watched the show I wanted and it's a great show, but like, I don't feel like my day was really meant to be lived this way. Like, I should have done something that pushed me. And so that's, for me, is the big part about escaping comfort, seeking out greatness, and doing so whenever I can.
And that way, when you do give yourself those moments of comfort, they feel even better.
Oh, definitely. I think it's one of those, it's the reward that you get. Like, I love to run marathons as well. And so I think about, while I'm running the marathon, I'm thinking about the beer I'm going to have afterwards and then the nap I'm going to take. And it's amazing how much that drives my marathon running, because it works very well.
I have a friend who said once his favorite thing about running was the moment that he stopped. Yes. That one moment you're like, okay, that feels good.
That's exactly what it is, because the actual act of doing things sometimes is not as much fun, but it feels so good to finish, though.
Oh, that's good. That's something that everybody can keep in mind as like, it's not everybody loves the process of these things. It doesn't have to be comfortable, but pushing through it and then getting it done, you're going to feel so good afterwards.
Oh, exactly. And even now, like I'm in blogging for years now, and every single blog post is always a challenge. It doesn't matter what it is or how easy the content would be for me. The actual act of producing content is still challenging. Right. And I know that I have to get through that process, do the work, and then when I'm done, I get that satisfaction, the result that I wanted.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be very obvious to everybody listening to this podcast that you are a huge reader. So I'm just curious if you can talk about any of your favorite productivity books that you would recommend for people to read.
Definitely. The two that I always recommend are Getting Things Done by David Allen and The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. Getting Things Done is probably like the most famous book in terms of productivity in the last 10 years. It really spells out this amazing system of how to be productive. And it's based on principles, not based on tools. So what he discusses are things that you could apply to any tool you want to use. Whether I use Noseby for my task manager, you could use Microsoft Outlook or anything else you would choose. The point of that book is really to say, here's a way to think about your projects you're going to pursue, the lists you're going to put them in, and how you're going to approach your day to be able to get everything out of your head. That's really David Allen's biggest kind of mission is to say, get all these ideas, all these tasks, all these little to-dos, get it out of your head and get it on paper. Get it into a system. Get it somewhere where you can organize it and look at it separately, because your brain is designed to do creative work. It's not designed to remember tasks and random lists of things. Like that's what the tools are there for. So you want to be able to be productive, your brain needs to be available to be creative. And that's your goal, is to figure out how to be as effective as you possibly can be with your systems so that your brain is free to do the hard work. And then there's Darren Hardy's The Compound Effect is all about, the compound effect itself is this idea that if you do little things over a long period of time, you get big results. So if you work out every single day for a year, you're going to be in significantly better shape than if every day for a year you had a beer instead. And so that's the example, at least in the book, I think. If someone has a beer and someone has a smoothie, and then at the end of the year, one guy has gained 20 pounds, one guy's lost 20 pounds. And it really is like over the course of a long period of time, little actions add up in a big way. And to me, that's what productivity is all about. That every day doing those little things, so that after a month or a year or 10 years, you can look back and say, look how successful and productive I've been. But it took 10 years to get there because I had to do all that work every single day for a long period of time. But that's what it takes ultimately to be very accomplished.
It sounds like a great book. I can't wait to check that out. I'll leave the link to in the show notes page for people too. So
yeah, that'd be awesome.
What's coming up next for you, Jeff? Anything you can share?
The biggest thing for me right now is the book that I'm working on, which exciting. Kind of popped up. This last month, I had a publisher just randomly email me and ask me to write a book. So,
what we all wish for.
Yeah, I know. It's just really surprising for me, but amazing. So,
that's great.
Yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do most days now. Is I spend 4 to 5 hours just writing on my book, and it's hard work, but it's a lot of fun. And it's one of the best things I've done in a while to really kind of hone my message and work on something that's really a really great project to work on. And so the book won't be released until January of next year, or maybe February of next year, but it'll be a little while. But the act of putting that together has been just a really great challenge. And as someone I've been blogging, I've done ebooks, I've done my own self-published book, to be able to do a published book is it's awesome.
Ah, that's cool. I can't wait to read them. Okay, so here we are at the end of the interview, and I've got a couple of fun questions I want to run by you. So, what is the one? I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to say it anyway. What is the one food item you can't live without?
Bananas.
I knew it. Thank you for not disappointing me.
I know. I love to talk about bananas. So if you have any questions about bananas, just hit me up. I got that.
Because you eat a lot of bananas. Is that right?
I do. I usually have at least one big smoothie a day with about 10 to 12 bananas, plus other ones that I eat randomly as well. So, yes.
Okay, so I just have to ask you, what's the most number of bananas that you've eaten in a day?
40.
Say that again, 40, right?
40 bananas in a single day, yes.
Wow, that's a lot of bananas. You really like bananas.
I do, it's true.
So what's the favorite app on your phone?
Favorite app? Actually, it's Noseby. It's my to-do manager or task manager, because that's the one that I go to most often. Of all the apps that I use, I rely on that for everything that I do. So I do have I play a lot of Temple Run, the really addictive iPhone app of the game. Beyond that, though, I do a lot to get stuff done whenever I can.
Well, it's good to have a little bit of fun, too. Temple Run, I'll have to check that one out. That's good. Do you have any time for TV at all? And if you do, what's your favorite show?
I do have time for TV. Usually I reserve that for late at night. And recently it's been House of Cards. I'm also a longtime addict to Family Guy, even though it's really immature of me to watch Family Guy.
My husband, he loves that show too.
Yeah, I watch reruns of it over and over and over again. I think I've seen every episode 3 or 4 times. So that's kind of my go-to, I think, is that, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, iPad, Kindle, or paperback?
Paperback, definitely. I'm very old school when it comes to books. I really like having a highlighter and a pen whenever I read a book.
Yeah.
If it's not that, it's an audiobook that I listen to when I run.
Yeah.
But I really can't get into reading books digitally. Like a PDF on a computer screen bugs me. I'd rather just print the PDF off and read it by hand. I don't know why. Reading long form doesn't work for me on a digital device. But I can do short form stuff is no problem. But yeah, long form, I love paperback books.
That's great. So Jeff, how can people find you online?
JeffSanders.com is the website. That's where all my content is. You can also find the 5 a.m. Miracle podcast on iTunes or Stitcher or a bunch of other podcast platforms. So yeah, the best place to go though is JeffSanders.com.
Great. Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really had a great time.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much to Jeff Sanders for being my guest on today's episode of the Chopped Podcast. If you were chopping carrots and couldn't write down something important, don't worry, we took the notes for you. Just head on over to choppedcon.com where I put up links for each show, including the stuff we talked about today and more information about our guests. If you like the Chopped Podcast, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on iTunes. It helps the show tremendously. Also, you can spread the word about Chopped Podcast using @ChoppedCon on Twitter or Instagram, or even Facebook. Those kinds of friend-to-friend referrals really means a lot. You inspire me so much, so I hope today's show was helpful and inspirational to you as well. Thanks for listening and have a great week.